All right, guys, welcome to the Cookalong. We are so excited to be cooking along with you guys. We've got some really great produce that we're going to be cooking with today, and let's go ahead and open our bag and see what it all is. So, as per usual, we'll be cooking with some of this stuff. Some of it we'll be saving. This is the Spigger Yellow. It's an Italian leaf broccoli. We've got this gorgeous sprouting cauliflower that we're going to use in our salad. Oops, a little spill over there. Yum. You can eat all this gorgeous stem, everything. All right, we've got some cabbage. Oh, here's a little more cauliflower. We've got some cabbage that we're not going to be using during the cook-along, and some green love apple peppers. These are just unripe peppers. They're like green peppers. We're going to set these all aside because we're not going to use them today. We've got our gorgeous Radicchio that we're going to use for our salad. Just going to put this stuff down here so it's easy to access. Oh, we've got these beautiful little mini pumpkins that we're going to stuff. They'll be so pretty. I've stuffed these little pumpkins. A couple different varieties. I'll talk about those a little later. In the paper bag, we've got some beautiful sweet potatoes. These are a variety called Bayou Bell sweet potatoes. I'm going to stick those aside because you'll be able to use those later. And then lastly, we've got this buckwheat flour, which is grown at Southwind Farm, Southwind Produce. Really delicious. We're going to use that for our cookies. So there's all the produce that we're going to use. And let's dive right in, shall we? We're going to start by turning our oven on to 375 degrees. We'll use that temperature throughout the evening. And we're going to start today with the thing that's going to take the longest to cook, which is our stuffed pumpkins. So we're going to start with our stuffing. Start by making our bulgur wheat. If you are using a different grain, I would just cook it according to the package directions. But bulgur wheat, which is a really beautiful variety of wheat that's been it's been cut with steel blades, sort of like steel cut oats. Same kind of thing, except it's done with wheat instead of with oats. All right, so we have a cup of grain. We're gonna add a cup and a half of water. Cup and a half of water. Go ahead and turn that on. I'm going to add a pinch of salt just to make sure it's flavored all the way through. And a little squirt of olive oil, just a tablespoon or two, which just gives it a little richness, which is really nice. So we're going to bring this up to the boil, and then we're going to cover it, turn it down, and let that finish cooking through. And meanwhile, we're going to work on the rest of our stuffing, which we're going to use some ground pork, although you could use ground lamb, you could use ground turkey, you could use whatever you wanted. You could even use whole chickpeas and just cook those in olive oil. But I'm using this really beautiful pork from First Hand Foods here, which I'm just going to put in a large skillet. You'll notice I'm starting the skillet cold, and I'm not putting any fat in there because good ground pork, or any ground meat for that matter, should have some nice bit of fat in it. And so that'll render out as we cook through. Just like that. Turn on a little more light. Just like that. So we're going to let that sort of slowly come up to temperature. And in the meantime, we're going to prepare, pardon me. Sorry about that, guys. In the meantime, we are going to prepare our aromatics, which is going to be, in this case, some onion. So I'm going to review how to dice an onion. We're going to cut off both ends of the onion, leaving a little bit of the root area intact, like that. Remember, we've got our oven preheating right now to 375. Then we're going to cut all the way through from pole to pole. And we're going to save a little bit of this onion for our salad. So don't do all of it. We're going to slice up most of it. Unfortunately, we couldn't include onions in the basket this week because Southwind has used up all their onions. All the onions they grew this summer are done. So I'm just going going to keep sort of mixing around this pork, making sure that it browns into nice even little chunks. Probably a good idea to just season a little bit. Just season a little bit, starting to build some layers of flavor here. And now with this onion, you want to find the root end, which is this side here. You can see the sort of core, the dense core. And we're just going to cut almost all the way through. Almost all the way, not all the way through, but all the way down. So we have these sort of like fingers, okay? Then we're going to go horizontally with a sharp knife, and then we're just going to go down. Just like that. So get a nice dice of this onion. And then this little heel, I like to just cut this, like that. And we're going to reserve this onion off to the side because we don't want to add that until our pork has had sufficient time to brown. The browning in something like pork happens by driving off all the moisture in the pork. Because as long as there's moisture, all right, oven has come up to temp, so it's ready for us when we're ready for it. But the idea is that the browning happens at much higher temperatures than 212. And as long as there's moisture in here or on the surface, it's not going to get above 212 because the water is going to be evaporating to keep the temperature down. But once that moisture starts evaporating out, that's when we can actually get browning. And so before, if we were to add all this onion now, that would introduce a whole bunch of water into the pan. And so we're not going to get the browning. So first we want to make sure we get some nice browning on the pork, and then we can add the aromatics. In the meantime, let's go ahead and I've got some pre-minced garlic here, but you can mince up some garlic because we're going to need that in a second. And the other thing we're going to need is we're going to need those greens. And so these greens have already been washed. You're welcome to give them another wash if you'd like, but I'm just going to run a knife through them at about maybe ½ inch width. And the leaves are small enough that we don't have to cut them in the other direction either. Just like that. These stems, if you want to roast these up alongside the pumpkins, they're really delicious, or you can put them in soups or stocks, anything. Really tasty. We don't want to add them to the stuffing because then they'd be a little too tough. But once the pork has started to brown nicely, once you've got these sort of like nice little brown bits like that, that's when we can go ahead and keep building up the flavor of our stuffing. So we're going to add this onion here. Little runaway onion. And honestly, I think that half an onion, that was a big onion, so I think half this onion is fine. And we're going to cook the onion. And remember, we haven't added any fat here, so we're cooking the onion in that same delicious rendered out pork fat. Okay, my bulgur wheat has come to a boil, so I'm going to turn the temperature way down to low, and I'm going to cover it. Now, I don't have a lid for this pan, so I'm just going to use a little foil and just press it tightly around the edges like that. And we're going to start a timer. This bulgur wheat, depending on what your grain is, it'll take different amounts of time to cook. But this bulgur wheat should only take about 12 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and set this timer, and we'll here. Boom. Timer set. You'll also notice I haven't added the garlic yet to this. I'm going to turn the temperature down here to maybe medium high. I haven't had the garlic because the garlic can burn, and we really don't want to get any burned flavors in here. So we're going to cook the onion first, and then we'll add the garlic. All right. We're also going to go ahead and prep up our nuts and our apricot because those are going to need to go in there as well. So let's get that moving. Slide it over here. All right. Got a third of a cup of almonds. So we're just going to run our knife through. The almond adds a really nice crunch to this dish, which I just love. Now, one of the really cool things about this dish is that this recipe is really more of a broad technique. And you could actually really substitute out all of the different ingredients from it to make them something else. So you don't have pork, that's fine, you can use something else. You don't have bulgur, you want to use a different grain? No problem. You can use brown rice, wild rice, farro, you can use quinoa, whatever you want. If you don't have onion, use fennel, use cabbage, use celery. Garlic, you could use ginger, you could leave it out. The greens, use a different green. I mean, you can use, you can sub out any of these things. The nuts, you can use any nut or leave it out. Dried fruit, you could use raisins, you could use currants. All right, I just added about 3 tablespoons of garlic to the pan now that my onions are nice and cooked. Just gonna give that garlic a minute or 2 to get fragrant here. Yum. So you see, it's a really versatile recipe. Even the pumpkins that we're gonna roast in, those you could switch out. You could do this with eggplant, you could do this with zucchini, you could do this with whatever vegetable you want. You could even do this inside of like a Cornish game hen or a chicken if you wanted to do that. All right, so we're dicing about 1/3 of a cup of these apricots, or whatever dried fruit you're using. We just want to make little sort of bite-sized pieces. Is good. Alright, so once the garlic has started to get a little aromatic and you can smell it, go ahead and add our greens into the pan. And we're really just giving these greens a chance to wilt down. They'll have plenty of time to cook in the oven, so we don't want to really raise them down or cook them down too much here. We just want to wilt them down. Those are basically wilted. We're going to add in our nuts and our fruit. That cooked together. And then I'm just going to turn the pan off. Right now we're just waiting for the buckwheat, or excuse me, for the bulgur wheat. Bulgur wheat. Give this a toss. So this part is done. Once this is done cooking, we'll combine them and we'll go on the pumpkins. Meanwhile, let's go ahead and get our pumpkins ready to go. We've got 2 different types of pumpkins here, and I'll show you how we're going to do it. We're going to cut off maybe a little less than 1 inch from the top. And what we're going to do is we're just going to use a knife to sort of cut a hole in the center. Sort of like you're just making a jack-o'-lantern here. And then use a spoon to just scoop out all those seeds. And you can really dig in there, but if you leave a couple seeds behind, that's no problem. All this stuff is edible. Anyway, scrape that out pretty nicely. That. Save the lids, because that's going to make a really cute little top. Hands off, that's cooking. Save those tops, we're going to roast those and it's going to be really, really cute to serve it. There's another one here. Now, we've got, like I said, 2 different varieties. These smooth skin ones are called a coconut, and they're sort of similar to a butternut squash. And these sort of like heirloomy, wrinkly ones is a variety called black futsu squash, which has really just, both of these are really not particularly common varieties, and they have great flavor. And we're using these baby ones, which didn't ever really get a chance to grow all the way up because late in the season they didn't have a chance to finish developing fully. All right, do the black futsu here. And like I said, if you don't have these little mini squash, and you want to make this recipe again, you can stuff this stuffing into anything, and it would be delicious. And the cool thing about this stuffing is it's fully cooked. So when we stuff it into these squash, we're really just waiting for the squash to cook all the way through. Because the stuffing, there's nothing in the stuffing that sort of needs to cook through. It's all It's all sort of fully cooked already, which is nice because then we can just focus on making sure that the vessel is cooked. All right, boom. We've got all of our pumpkins hollowed out here. Bulgur is still cooking. Let's see how much time we've got on the timer here for that. We've got about 3 or 4 more minutes left on that. Gonna leave that covered. And we're gonna go ahead and, while we're waiting for that, we're gonna go ahead and prep up this cauliflower because the cauliflower is gonna roast in the oven as well. I'm gonna grab a sheet pan here and gonna cover it in foil. This is not necessary, but it will make cleanup easier. And actually, you know, with 2 different sheet pans. One for the cauliflower and one for the squash. Like that. And then we're gonna go ahead and prep the prep the cauliflower. I'm gonna start by pulling these leaves off. Do not throw these leaves away. They are delicious to eat. I'm gonna maybe run a knife just through the center of them to break them down a little bit. And then with the sprouting cauliflower, I just like to sort of pick off all these big stalks. And the nice thing is that they're already sort of bite-sized, so you don't even have to really break them down more. And then once you get to this sort of center part here, what I like to do is just run my knife through them to sort of break them into more bite-sized pieces. And then save that stem and just slice it into chunks and roast it alongside the rest of the cauliflower, and it'll be just as delicious. So again, we're gonna pull those leaves off. The smaller ones can go on as is. The bigger ones we're gonna run a knife through. And then look at these beautiful, look at that. These are so beautiful and long, so elegant. Pull those all off. And then knife to the center there. Let's slice this. All right, last one. Boom. All right, and the cauliflower, I know this is pretty radical. We're gonna coat it with olive oil. Brace yourself, guys. Olive oil, a couple cloves of minced garlic. Let's get all that. A big pinch of salt and pepper. I know, pretty crazy. And now let's just get in there, bust up that garlic, and just sort of toss it all around. Make sure everything's coated in olive oil. There's no big chunks of garlic. Doing seasoning. What the seasoning is. And you can actually give it a taste and see if it tastes like it's seasoned well. It tastes good. Got garlic in there. Spread it into sort of one even layer. Boom. Stop. Gonna wash my hands. Let's check our bulgur, shall we? And it looks done to me. Let's see what we got here. Yep, looks done to me. Yum. Okay. So, if you were just serving this as is, it might be good to let it rest here and just stay put. Because we are making it into a stuffing and we're going to cook it again, it's okay to just throw it in as is. So I'm going to start by taking the cauliflower, putting those in the oven. Then I'm going to take this bulgur, and with a fork I'm going to fluff it and just sort of dump it in. Dump it in with our stuffing. I'm going to rinse this pot out because we're going to need that. Wash that, but we're going to need that in a little bit. And now we're just going to mix this stuffing through. And again, you could use any grain here. You could use any nut, any green, any aromatics, whatever you fancy. By mixing the grain into the pan that we cook the pork in, we get the added advantage of this grain soaking up all that delicious pork fat from the bottom of the pan. All right, so importantly, last, we're gonna go ahead and give this a taste. Might need salt. We'll have a nice pinch of salt and some pepper as well. But it's really good. You get the sweetness from the apricot, the crunch, a little bite from this pepper that we're gonna add, the richness from the pork. And then go ahead and taste it again. See if it, that's it. Yum. Perfect. All right, so now I'm gonna get these ready. I'm just gonna add a little bit of olive oil to my aluminum foil just to make sure that things don't stick. And then we're gonna just stuff these squash. And you can use a spoon, or you can use your fingers or whatever tool you like. And I just like to sort of pack it in. I'm gonna make sure everyone gets as much of that stuffing as possible. So really pack it in. And it's totally fine if it sort of sticks up a little bit. I think it makes it feel very generous to have it sort of popping out, just like that. And one other trick that I'll give you, this pumpkin seems to be pretty stable, but if you have pumpkins that are less stable, like that, you can, what you can do is you can just take the knife and just whack a little bit off the bottom, and that way it'll sit nice and flat. Just make sure you do that before you stuff it. It gets harder to do once it's full of piping hot stuffing. All right, using the back of the spoon, just press it firmly in. Use your fingers to shape it there. Beautiful. I like to roast the tops alongside. So I take the tops, make sure they have a little olive oil on them so that when you press them down, they're okay. Let's keep stuffing here. So the reason we want to get this done first is because these are going to take the longest of everything we're making today. So we want to get these in the oven, roasting, and while they're roasting, we can do everything else that we need to do. Sturdy. This one needs to take a little off. Nice. If you really want to go the extra mile, you could take the pumpkin seeds that you pull out of these pumpkins, clean them, and roast them, and then put them into the stuffing. And then it would get the crunch from the seeds from the pumpkin themselves. Ooh, this one's got a nice big cavity. I love bulgur wheat, and I think people don't cook with it nearly enough. It's what tabbouleh would normally be made with. It's really delicious. Okay, boom. We got these done. Everything's got a little oil under it. Towards the center. Make sure there's room for everything to breathe here. I think we're good. Gonna throw them in the oven. All right, boom, we are well on our way here. So while that's happening, we've got our cauliflower going, we've got the filling going. Now we can go ahead and turn our attention to our cookies. So I'm going to go ahead and wash my hands because I got some garlicky, onioniness on them. And I'm going to clean up my board here a little bit. You're done with the stuffing, so I'm going to go ahead and put that over here. You can totally eat that leftover stuffing. It would be great in like a sort of gratin bowl for lunch or whatever. Really delicious. But for our cookies, these cookies are really amazing because they feature the buckwheat grown from Southwind produce, which is so special. So we're going to start by combining our butter. We've got 1 cup or 2 sticks of butter with our brown sugar. We're going to use 1.5 cups of brown sugar, lightly packed here. I've already got my butter into the mixer here. Do a cup. Cup and 1/2 cup. Boom. And we're just going to start by what's called creaming those together. So just on low speed, starting at low speed, we're just going to mix those so that they sort of become creams together. And meanwhile, we're going to go ahead and sift our dry ingredients together, or not sift, we're going to mix those together. And sifting is an easy way to mix. We're going to open up our buckwheat package. Now, contrary to popular belief, buckwheat is not actually a wheat at all. It's actually not even a grain, technically. It's a seed, which is pretty cool. Take that off. We're going to measure at 2 cups. 1 cup, 2 cups, and we are going to add to our buckwheat flour. We're going to add 1/3 cup of unsweetened cocoa powder. All right, once this is mixed, let's go ahead and turn the temperature up and make sure that's really well mixed together. 1/3 cup of cocoa powder, and we need a tablespoon of baking powder. So I'm going to grab. All right, yeah, light and fluffy. Let's grab a spatula to just make sure we're incorporating all the butter, all the brown sugar. It should be really, really light and fluffy. You really gotta make sure your butter is soft. All right, full tablespoon of baking powder. Now we're just going to go ahead and sift that together. And this does 2 things. It makes sure we don't have any lumps. It incorporates everything together. And it sort of it combines it and it makes sure it doesn't have any lumps. It does 2 things. 2 things is what it is. I just like to use a spoon or a tablespoon or something to sort of mix it around through here. And you'll see, especially the cocoa powder, that there are oftentimes some lumps. And you can just push those lumps right on through. You don't have to throw that out. Well, also with the buckwheat, you'll see that there are probably some of the sort of hulls of the buckwheat which are left behind. They're sort of little black and white specks, and that you can either put in or you can toss. so we've got this mixture sifted and combined. Now we're gonna go ahead and add that to our butter. Trying to get all of it in a bowl there. And then I'm gonna put this over here just in case it, on low speed, just to make sure. Sometimes it'll sort of get a little cloudy here. Just to mix that in. And one of the neat things about this recipe is because it doesn't have any wheat in it, it doesn't have any gluten, and so you don't actually have to worry about over mixing it. Again, I'm going to scrape down the sides to make sure we get all that butter in there. But you don't have to worry about over mixing because there's no gluten in it at all. That could be overdeveloped. Like that. And in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and prepare. We need some confectionery sugar. We need a little bit of strong brewed coffee, or I'm actually going to use a little whiskey. You could use vanilla, any sort of strong flavored little liquid. And we need about 1.25 cups of good chocolate, either chocolate chips or something else. So now we're going to go ahead and add that chocolate, and we're going to add our flavorful liquid. We need about 1 teaspoon of this in there. I'm just going to eyeball it. Oh, looks like a teaspoon. Let's give it another mix here. Get that all incorporated. There we go. It'll taste a little crumbly. It'll taste chocolatey. It'll taste. It'll certainly taste of the grain, which is so nice. All right, so next up, what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and get ready to shape these. But before we do that, let's go ahead and get our pan ready. So we're gonna get this pan, keeping the garlicky things separate. I'm gonna get some parchment paper here. Check on our cauliflower, shall we? See how that's looking. So it's starting to brown. We can give it a little taste. Still a little crunchy. I'll put it back in. I like to cook it until it still has a little bit of crunch to it. I don't want it to be super duper floppy, but I think it needs another minute or two. So let's go ahead and shape these cookies, making sure you have clean hands because we don't want any of that garlic or onion flavor getting in here. And if you're not sure, give them another wash. I'll do that just in case. It's not the worst when you taste something sweet, but then there's just a tiny bit of garlic flavor in it. Not the best. All right, so. Excuse me, I'm gonna get one more cutting board just to get a clean vertical surface on. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this dough, and I'm gonna dump it out onto this surface, just like this. Making sure to get any that's stuck to the bottom. And then using my hand, I'm just gonna shape it. Just gonna shape it into a log, okay? And it might seem a little crumbly. Which is fine. But we're just squeezing it into a log. We can roll it a little bit. And we want to squeeze it out into a shape which is about 2-inch diameter or so. And you can actually make these cookies as big or small as you want. But I think I'm actually going to make cookies that are slightly smaller than the recipe says, which means I'll have more cookies. You don't have to get the shape perfect, but you do want it relatively even so that it cooks evenly. All right, so just like that, we've got this sort of shaped out into our log. And I'm gonna grab a knife, fresh knife, not an onion knife. I'm gonna cut this in half. Like I said, I think I'm gonna go into 16 instead of 12. Which means I'm gonna cut into 4s, and I'm gonna get the 4s in half, and then do it again. These are still going to be pretty big, delicious cookies. All right, so now I'm going to go into 2 sheet pans with all the cookies. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to take these. If they're misshapen, as you pull them, you can just sort of reshape them a little bit. I'm going to do 8 on each sheet pan. I'm going to sort of stagger them a little bit. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually only going to bake off one of these sheet pans of cookies. I'm going to freeze the other one, and then I can cook it off later. Because, let's be honest, I don't think I need to eat all of these cookies tonight. But this is a great stage at which you can freeze the cookies and then come back to them. I love having frozen cookie pucks in my freezer. Because then you can, I'm actually just going to cook off 6 of these right now. 6 of them. And then I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these just shaped up. And for freezing, you don't need to leave all this space because once they're frozen solid, then you can just throw them into a Ziploc bag. But I will show you the final step before we bake them off. These cookies, I think you're gonna love these cookies. I think for some people, buckwheat is not their favorite, but these cookies really showcase how delicious and nutty buckwheat can be. And they're big cookies too. Even if you're doing more cookies than the recipe calls for, they're big, delicious cookies. It's got there's chunks of chocolate in there. You can use any kind of chocolate you want. You can use dark chocolate or milk chocolate or whatever sounds good to you. There we go. Wash my hands. A lot of hand washing. Both for food prep and for COVID reasons. All right. And the last couple steps before we cook these off, and just in time the cauliflower is done. I'm going to put that here. And the last step with these cookies is I'm going to salt them using, if you have like flaky Malden salt, that's great. Otherwise, regular salt is fine. And just like a nice little pinch of salt on each one of these. Because remember, we didn't add any salt to the dough, and so having some salt in there is really nice. And then the last step, excuse me. And then the last step is that we're going to dust them with a little powdered sugar, which is more decorative than anything, but it creates this really cool crinkle pattern when they come out. So I like to just put some powdered sugar into my thing and then just sort of dust each one. Just like that, on top of that salt. Do all these other ones. All this together. Boom, just like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and throw them into the oven. Just like that. And I'm going to set my timer for about 12 These probably you just want to start checking them around 12 minutes. But depending on the size, it may vary. So 12-minute timer. I'm gonna throw these ones into the freezer, in the fridge. To bake off later. And we are in great shape, guys. We are moving right along. Gonna get rid of this cutting board. A little tidying up. And then we are ready to move on to our salad, for the rest of our salad. So I'm going to start by taking that onion and slicing about 1/3 of a cup of the onion. Well, you can do as much as you like if you really like a lot of onion. We're going to do about 1/3 of a cup, and I'm going to go from the non-root end, just thinly slice them. Just like that, not a ton, just a little scant 1/3 of a cup. And then we're going to make some vinegar. I'm going to use balsamic, but you could use sherry, you could even use white wine or red wine vinegar. And about 1/3 of a cup, and just put that over the onions. And what that'll do is 2 things. The first thing is it is going to make the onion flavor a little bit milder. The second thing is that it's going to infuse this vinegar with a really nice mild onion flavor, which is just delightful. And so then the whole salad has some of that really nice onion flavor in it. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on our eggs. So we're going to take that same pan that we used before for our bulgur and just give it a spray out, and then fill it up with hot water. Like that. Just bring that up to the boil. This would be a good time to taste your cauliflower again. Still a little bit of al dente crunch. The garlic is nice and sort of roasty and toasty. Little bits of brown on the cauliflower give it a really good flavor, but it's not charred or anything, so it'll add sort of a sweetness to the salad that I think is really nice. So let's go ahead and do our radicchio salad. Again, because it's just me eating, I'm only going to do 1 of these 2 heads of radicchio, but definitely do 2 if you're cooking for more people. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slice off that root, that sort of brown root end here. And then I'm going to go through the middle of it because I want to cut these leaves in half. I'm going to get a mixing bowl. This nice wooden mixing bowl. And just peel off those leaves. These leaves. And to be honest, the radicchio shouldn't be that dirty, but it's always a good idea if you want to wash the leaves once you pull them apart. Because there is sometimes some dirt that gets up in there. Yum. And then just pull on the bottom half, just start pulling off those leaves. And then once they get stuck, the root needs to come down a little further, take another whack off the bottom. By doing it this way incrementally, you lose less of the radicchio because you don't just whack off 2 inches from the bottom right off the get-go. Just like that. It's bitter, but it's tender. It's got a lot of flavor. That'll be plenty for the 2 of us. So we've got this beautiful radicchio, and to counter the bitterness, we've got a couple things going on. We've got our cauliflower, which is going to be sweet and roasty. We've got the sweetness of our balsamic or our vinegar dressing, the sort of richness of the onion, richness of the egg that we're going to be doing, the richness of the cheese, and it's all going to come together and make something that feels really well balanced because it has all those different components.